I'm Catherine Arndt, the Chief of the VLGA Connect Studio. Welcome to today's episode, brought to you by the VLGA, your councillor support network and the national broadcaster on all things local government.
It's that time of the week. You know what I'm talking about. It's TGU time, and that's where we just dig into what's happening around the local government sector over the last week or so. And to help me do that this week, I've got Tony Rownick with me from Hunt & Hunt Lawyers, who are also our terrific sponsors of the program. Hi, Tony.
Great to be here once again, Chris.
Great to have you here. How's your week been?
Really good, really good. Been in Melbourne, which is a bit of a novelty for most of the week.
Yes.
But it's been good, and we're working our way again. I think, as I said last month, to the end of the financial year, and
Yes.
I'm sure that's meaning a lot of forward budgeting being thought about at councils as well as private organisations like mine.
Yeah. Well, council budgets have certainly been in the news right around the country, with lots of interesting and somewhat difficult decisions being made by councils left, right and centre. Just a quick note, Julie couldn't join us this week. I think she had a paying client make a call on her time. How dare she? But anyway.
Got to prioritise that. So we've got to pay the rent, don't we?
We wish her the best, and hopefully we'll catch up with her soon. Now, eagle-eyed viewers will be noticing you're wearing a tie today, Tony. That's not normal. What's going on?
I know. Do you remember when we used to, have a shave every day and wear a tie, us males? And it seems a distant memory, but occasionally I like to mix it up. I get asked at work, why are you wearing a tie? And I say, I'm applying for a job. There's a junior lawyer role around the corner.
Very good. All right. Now we got that out of the way. Speaking of people who do generally wear ties, although I've noticed not so much as you've just said, as in the past, CEOs. We've got a new CEO coming into the Victorian sector, but not a new CEO in terms of experience. Dale Dixon has been announced this week as the chief executive incoming at Stonnington City Council. We've been waiting on this one for a while, Tony, and I must admit, I didn't see this particular appointment coming.
No, nor I. I think it is an interesting appointment. I actually think it's a good one, but interesting in that, Dale wouldn't have the depth of connections with other CEOs in Victoria, or with other offices across the sector, or with government, the inspectorate, those other authorities that oversee the Victorian sector. Given his experience, which is oodles of really valuable experience, is in Queensland. Yeah. Being the CEO of Gold Coast City Council for almost 20 years, I think, and what an enormous undertaking Gold Coast City Council is.
Second biggest one in the country, Tony. So Brisbane's generally known to be the largest in terms of population. Gold Coast is second behind Brisbane. So it's a massive undertaking. Yeah.
And I think 14 councils plus the mayor. Imagine, what an occasion a council meeting must be at Gold Coast. So brings some, and not just Gold Coast, let me say, some regional places in Queensland as well. So brings really wonderful high level experience. Originally a Victorian, I think, from up your way, Chris.
Well, he played for Shepparton. So he's now, look, if Steve Cooper was on the show, he would have opened with, of course, he's a former AFL footballer.
He is.
Yes. So he played
games. Yeah, for Melbourne and the Bears. I think he started at Golden Square in the Bendigo League, but I think he might come from Shepparton. I thought he was a St Coleman's boy or something that you would know, Chris. But
no, probably just a little bit ahead of me, Tony. But it was the football, as you mentioned, Brisbane Bears, that took him to Queensland, as I understood it. And of course, his local government career blossomed from there. He was at Whitsunday, most recently at Mount Isa. Probably just maybe keeping the seat warm for a little while, waiting for the opportunity to perhaps come home to Victoria, which he's described it as a homecoming of sorts. And I think lived in Paran at one point, according to the Stonnington release as well. So you make the comment about the depth of the network. I would make the point, I know this doesn't replace 25 years being in the state and having those deep connections, but I do know he's been part of the Chief Officers Group, which is a terrific network of CEOs across Australia and New Zealand. So he will have some contacts and with colleagues at CEO level in Victoria, which will certainly help in terms of his network and sounding boards.
I agree, and I think by the same token there'll be a whole batch of CEOs and councillors in Victoria really eager to meet Dale, and people like yourself and I who just interested to hear some of the learnings that he brings from that Queensland environment, and I think that's a really healthy for both Stonnington and the Victorian sector broadly to get sort of injections of that experience and knowledge.
We should acknowledge Rick Kwasek, who's been filling in the role there on an interim basis, and by all accounts has done a great job, and congratulations to Rick, and I'm sure there's bigger and better things coming for him. So that reduces our list of outstanding CEO appointments down to 2, Tony. On the list, we just have Melbourne and Greater Geelong at the moment. That's the lowest number that I can recall seeing in certainly a couple of years. And I believe that's about to be whittled down to 1, because I do note that Greater Geelong, putting aside the media speculation, which is saying that it's getting very close and final interviews were apparently being held this week, they did have a special meeting to deal with a contractual matter on Tuesday afternoon, late Tuesday. I'm surmising that's a step in the CEO appointment process, so we could be hearing something about that outcome very soon.
Yeah, I think you're right. I did hear about that meeting. Interesting that, they say only 2 vacancies, but they are, perhaps the two
biggest
leading
the
biggest councils in the state, and really significant, those 2 appointments. And as you say, they'll be it's been well watched, and no doubt those determinations will be really big news stories throughout the sector.
Yep, and we'll keep you on top of those as soon as anything comes to hand on the roundup and here on TGU on our weekly update. Another story we've been following, Tony, and we've talked about a couple of times, is the Knox City Council review of kindergartens. Knox is one of the few councils that have been pretty much all in the kindergarten provision space. I think they've had up to 30 directly run kindergarten services. We've talked about the fact that they've been undertaking a major review of that position, given all the changes that are happening, particularly from a state government level. We learned this week that they are looking at getting out of direct standalone kindergarten service and perhaps leasing their buildings to other providers. There's a process of consultation with staff that is underway, but I don't think any surprise that perhaps that's where they've landed, at least in principle.
Yeah, as you say, unusual the level, the depth of involvement in terms of the number of kindergartens that the council was directly involved in the provision of those services up till now. And the council had announced that they were undertaking a review. I think the Mayor, Marcia Timmers-Leach, has come out after the decision to say, look, a really difficult decision, but, it's just no longer feasible for Knox Council to continue to run kinders at that scale. We will, continue to see those services delivered, as I say, through different providers, with council not being as directly involved in the future. This is something close to my heart. My wife's a kindergarten teacher at Mill Park Lake, South Morang, that area, where Whittlesea Council is still involved in the direct provision there. But I think we're seeing this across the sector, where in a time when resources are limited, councils are reprioritising, are looking, are there other ways to more efficiently deliver a key service, so that those services that only a council can properly deliver can continue to be directly delivered by councillors, given resource limitations.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? You mentioned Whittlesea still involved in that space, still involved in the in-home care, aged care service space as well, by choice. I noticed the Weekly Times, I haven't had a chance to read this article, has done a story this week looking at the number of councils that are getting out of the aged care space. And I'm not linking the two, but Northern Grampians this week has announced an independent review of its involvement in the home care service space. They're not saying they're intending to get out, but they are saying, quite appropriately, we need to really understand what's required in our community in this space and what our role is so that we can make some strategic decisions going forward.
Yeah, rightly so. Kevin Irwin, the mayor, lovely guy, been up there at Northern Grampians a number of occasions with the councillors, and Kevin's a very experienced councillor, I think 20 odd years on council, and he's come out and explained that council's wanting to engage with the service users, really to allow for some informed decision making, as you say, not flagging a particular decision either way at this stage, but it is a fact that across the sector, this provision of community-based home care services by councils has been under some scrutiny. There are some significant changes in the way these services have to be provided. It's some key dates ahead, and I think now is a timely point for councils to reconsider, knowing that these services are critical, knowing that they, that there's a need for them to continue to be available in the community, but there are various options in terms of delivery, and it's good to see that Northern Grampians don't go off and make a decision without, having a consultative process and asking for feedback.
I see they've engaged Heather Johnson to do that piece of work. I've had some dealings with Heather in the past, so good news for Heather to undertake that process, and we wish them all the best with that, and look forward to hearing what comes out of it at the end. Tony, we've talked about this next topic numerous times on the show, going way back to when we first started with Steve Cooper on the governance update. This issue about whether councillors or prospective councillors are well enough prepared for the role that they're putting their hand up for, and everyone agrees that for the most part they don't really get the grounding, the training perhaps that properly prepares them. And we've had 3 examples this week in an ABC report of councillors or former councillors saying that is the case and more needs to be done.
Yeah, I did see that, and I did see that some really experienced current and former councillors from municipalities that had faced some particular challenges with monitors or commissions of inquiry, came out and put their weight behind the notion that there ought to be better training for incoming prospective councillors. So former councillor Libro Mustica at Moira Council, Kevin Poulton at Wodonga, and Laura Binks at Strathbogie, I saw as part of a report, and also saw the CEO of the LGA, Catherine Arndt, make the point that local government is responsible for this great array of service delivery, and yet it's probably one of the more under-resourced levels of government. Those councillors or former councillors I mentioned reflected on, the challenge they had in coming into the sector and having to basically go on this steep learning curve. I think we've got to probably distinguish between prospective councillor training and actual induction training. Yeah, I think for candidates who are thinking of running, you need to know, what are the demands on your time, maybe they need to, this is thinking laterally on the spot, but maybe they need to attend a few council meetings before you actually run for council.
It'd be interesting to know how many candidates have actually taken the time to sit in on a council meeting and understand how the process works.
Yeah, so look, as a prospective candidate, I think besides knowing a little what you're getting into in terms of demands on your time, maybe a bit of an introduction to some of the behavioural standards, because I think, applying some of them during the election campaign might make for a better election outcome. Maybe some discussion about that preconceived bias, that Winky Pop line of cases. I've certainly seen candidates make some interesting statements during election campaigns that might sort of create that perception of bias were they to be elected. But I actually think the bigger, probably the critical focus should be on the induction training piece, where when councillors are elected, what support do they get early on, but also, in an ongoing way to help their learning, their roles and responsibilities, their, the provisions around, as I say, standards of conduct and conflict resolution as well. How do we get on? How do we move forward when we have strong differences of opinion, and how do we stay functional?
And I think that's one of the pieces that is glaringly missing, that understanding that you're one vote as part of a team, and that team dynamic needs to be managed appropriately. I think a lot of councillors get into the role and then are quite blindsided by that dynamic and unprepared for it. Prepared to be challenged on that view, but I think most of those folks being quoted in the story probably agree on that. Noting that, and this is probably why they've reached out to those councillors or former councillors, all of those councillors have had some form of intervention in this term of the council, either through administration or monitors. So I guess that's underscoring the point, isn't it?
Yeah, and they can reflect on perhaps some of the reasons for that maybe having occurred in terms of the dynamic at council, and whether some more support in training might have assisted. I think there's great merit in that additional support and training, particularly I think for mayors too, or prospective mayors. I think both them understanding the expectations in terms of assisting in managing the functional group, but sort of helping to take them through the toolbox that a mayor has in terms of stepping in and perhaps redirecting the cohort when things are getting a bit off track or a bit torrid. I think there's a lot of merit in taking prospective mayors away and giving them some intense training in that space.
All right. Well, it's certainly the time to start thinking about it and preparing for it, as we're only a little over 12 months really. Certainly less than 12 months out from the campaign, I think, sort of really getting underway for many, with elections in October next year. Check out that story on ABC News. A couple of quick notes. The NGA wrapped up last week in Canberra. The Council of Local Governments, the first one in, I think, 10 years, happened on Friday with extraordinary attendance from around the country. And by all accounts, it was well worth bringing all of those representatives together to discuss the future of the sector and relations, at least with the federal government. One of the pieces of good news to come out of it, Tony, was that the federal assistance grants, I know there's been a practice of bringing some of that forward. I'm not sure whether we've often seen 100% of next year's grant allocation from the federal level coming forward before the end of the financial year. But the fact is 100% is going to drop into councils' accounts around about now.
Yeah, it's actually a great boon for councils in that the next 2 weeks to receive those financial assistance grants, perhaps faster than anticipated. And congratulations to the ALGA for their advocacy on this piece. I think this outcome's probably a real testament to that. In the Victorian space, it's the president and deputy president of the MAV who sit on that ALGA board, David Clark from Pyrenees Shire Council, and of course Rowan Leppert from Melbourne City Council. So we should acknowledge that their efforts here, and I think this decision is really just a further recognition of the cash flow financial crisis that's facing councils across the country. And it's a nice measure by the federal government to perhaps assist in some of those cash flow constraints.
Yeah, good point. And while we're talking boards, the VLGA board election has happened for those two positions that were up, and the VLGA has announced that Denise Massoud, the current president, has been returned for a new 3-year term, as has current board member Councillor Suzanne Newton from, so Denise is from Whitehorse, Suzanne from Darebin, back for 3 years. So well done to those two strong and dedicated VLGA board members on being re-elected.
Yeah, some real steady hands there. Great for some continuity with the VLGA. So yeah, well done.
Tony, some more fake parking tickets have turned up, this time in Greater Geelong. We've seen this happen a few times, and it seems to be moving around the state a bit, doesn't it? But Geelong has said, hey, if you've got a parking ticket, be very careful whether it's actually genuine or not.
Oh, this is, we're always getting these novel, sort of more sophisticated attempts to rip people off. I know. Is there some sort of underground university for, scoundrels or something, Chris?
I think it's called. I think it's called the dark web, isn't it? I wouldn't know how to get on it, but
I had a look at these parking tickets. They look pretty real to me. I don't know. I reckon I might have got sucked in if I got one. There's a barcode, there's a QR code. It looked legit. Had the logo of the council, but as you say, Robin Stevens, the director of corporate services at Geelong City Council, has come out in a statement and said, look, if you've been in the Geelong area, you've got a parking ticket recently, perhaps get on the council website and have a look for some of those key identifiers that are listed as, this is what a legitimate parking ticket from the council looks like. There are some real distinct differences between these fake tickets and the genuine item. And look, I imagine it, as you say, this happens regularly. It's a matter of time before these perpetrators move on and move on to Melbourne or one of the regional centres and play their game there as well.
Yes, I know Casey was one recently. You're right, they do look genuine, but one thing they pointed out, they do have a QR code, and genuine tickets do not have a QR code in Greater Geelong. Don't click on any QR code or link. And I noticed the link on it was www.City of Greater Geelong parking fine, all one word. I'm pretty sure that's not a genuine link either. So if you look closely, you can probably work it out, but it doesn't hurt to be particularly cautious in those circumstances. So thanks to Geelong for raising that. Electoral structure reviews, stage 2 is about to get underway. The VEC has announced that the first batch of 4 preliminary reports are coming out next week, and we've got, I think, 4 groups of 4 coming over the next few weeks, Tony. So 16 councils under review, and basically this is really the legislation says you should have single member wards in most cases, and this is really about why that shouldn't happen.
Look, I think it's right that we have this regular process, and it's right that there's a it's not determined by the politicians, the boundaries, it's determined by the independent body, and this is an opportunity for the politicians and the broader public to have their say. We started with stage 1. There was, I think, 12 rural shires that have been through that consultative process. This stage 2, as you say, 16 councils, regional and metropolitan. I think the first 4 are regional, if I remember right. But the councillors involved will be taking great interest, no doubt. As you say, it's about single representation in wards and how that's implemented and feedback on whether people want that or not. Ultimately the outcome's not going to keep everyone happy and probably won't be perfect either. But these processes are in place because of, I think, 18th century UK, where they had, remember the rotten boroughs? There was a dodgy one in, I think, Wiltshire, where it was like hardly any voters, and virtually all of them had the same surname.
Oh, really?
Pitt family. Like
right.
there was 2 Pitts, the younger and the elder, that were prime minister. I think they came out of this. Or anyway, I hope I'm not defaming anyone, but
we're getting a history
fixing
lesson.
The rotten boroughs. So we don't have them as a result of this. And in the modern day democratic world, there are actually places you don't have to go far. You go to the USA and you want to see what they call a gerrymander. Some of those electoral boundaries look like a spider's kind of tentacles. And they're designed in a partisan way. And so at least we can say this is a process that has that independence about it. And as I say, we won't all be happy with the outcome, but here's the opportunity for people to have their say and no doubt, as I say, some councillors will be very interested.
Yes, so there's a bit of history that we weren't anticipating we'd be getting today, folks. Ballarat, Greater Bendigo, Horsham and Mildura, Tony, are the first four, you're right. They are all regional. Okay, let's have a look at a couple of interstate stories that are worth noting. An ex-councillor in New South Wales has been banned from standing at the next election after making homophobic remarks about a colleague and commenting about the Lord Mayor and another councillor and their waste. This has all come to the New South Wales Civil and Administrative Tribunal, and they've come down pretty hard on Mr. Alan Robinson and found him guilty of misconduct.
Yeah, from a Newcastle councillor, I believe he is, but and banned from office for 2 years or something like that. It's actually
which effectively means he's out of the running for the next round of council elections, which I think was their intent.
There you go.
Yeah.
Well, for me, what stood out, it's actually, I think, unusual to see sanctions of this magnitude, and I actually think it's good to see a severity of sanctions for serious offending like this. I think what was relevant here was that there were repeated comments. They were in public settings. They were repeated to the media, and there was a refusal to provide a formal apology.
Yeah.
So there was some really circumstances here that really escalated, if you like, the significance of the behaviour. But I think there's a lesson for Victoria in here. I mean, we do have councillors who have been ordered by arbiters or whatever to make written apologies, and they may there may be a question as to whether those apologies are sincere or not. What are the sanctions? Are we seeing our local government inspectorate or other authorities sort of stepping in and being proactive in Victoria? I'd like to see some messaging sent out along those lines. So well done. I mean, it was a tribunal decision. There was an opportunity for all the parties to put their views, and a really strong message in the sanction.
And as you say, no remorse indicated there at all. It's another press report in which Mr. Robinson responds as saying something along the lines of, well, they should have banned me for life, because why would I go back into that cesspit or something of that nature? So he seems to be saying he wouldn't be standing again.
Yeah,
anyway.
Well, I'm not sure how well missed he'll be.
No. Look, on the apology issue, we had that example that Julie raised over in Western Australia, where I've followed a bit of the commentary that's followed that, where the former councillor at Coburn was directed to make an apology, and the apology was very legalistic. It was really, this is the apology that I've been directed to make. I'm paraphrasing. And, a lot of people have suggested it's not that genuine. She's only made it because she's been told to. So,
do you reckon it was written by a lawyer, Chris?
I suspect it may have been, Tony, but I'm sure it wasn't you.
No.
In Hobart, Hobart has stepped up with its new budget and doubled rates on short stay accommodation and doubled rates on people holding onto vacant land. They say these are measures to try and help ease the housing crisis. I think we'll see more of this potentially, Tony.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you, Chris. I think we are seeing it, and we're going to see more. I think we've seen it in Brisbane, have done something similar. I think Yarra City Council here in Melbourne are looking at short stay accommodation and rates, and up in Byron, they've got those sort of plans too. I think when measures like this are implemented, we're going to see the hotel sector applaud. We're going to see the Airbnb lobby group come out and say, it's dreadful for tourism locally, these sorts of things. But what the intent is of course to free up housing for the rental market, where we have seen in certain communities, and apparently in Hobart, a move away from private rental accommodation into this short stay Airbnb market. And so you end up having, in many cases, housing that is vacant for much of the week, and then it's occupied over a weekend, over a holiday period, but again for much of the year lies dormant, vacant, and when we've got this huge demand for accommodation.
Yes. Yeah, and similarly with the vacant land, I think the Lord Mayor Anna Reynolds said there's about 450 blocks of vacant land just sitting there being land banked, for want of a better word, and they're trying to encourage property owners to do something with that land that might help with the housing crisis rather than just sit on it. All right. Well done to Hobart for some leadership there. That's the last budget at the City of Hobart that Kelly Grigsby will be delivering as CEO, as of course we've previously reported. She's heading back to Victoria as the new CEO of the MAV very soon. Tony, your pick of the week is pretty close to home, Mount Alexander Shire, and again on the subject of the housing crisis.
Yeah, I just thought to signal this one out for seeing the councillors and officers at Mount Alexander Shire, Melbourne, Castlemaine, Harcourt, that sort of area, have taken a practical step to try and assist in relieving that accommodation crisis in their area. It's a change to the local laws that required that there be a permit always for any additional dwelling. The change means that if there's already an existing dwelling on a property, then it doesn't necessarily require some local permission process to put in a home on wheels or caravan or some other form of accommodation there. I like anything that gets rid of a bit of red tape, to be honest. But this, it's not going to have a massive impact on the volume of available housing in that council, but it will provide another option for some individuals in the community, and no doubt, allow them to, provide some alternative form of accommodation that might otherwise not have been available or have taken a long time to achieve. And there's in the press release, I saw mention of the issue of crisis accommodation, often for women, leaving relationships, looking for accommodation, don't really have the luxury of being able to wait for a year or more for the outcome of a permit process.
And I suspect in some cases this will retrospectively legitimise some arrangements that are happening under the radar. And we heard, and I've seen some commentary on that since this report came out. Tony, this reminds me, just last week we spoke about the issue up on the Sunshine Coast where there's one property with 4 tiny homes. So it wouldn't help in a case like that because there's still got to be some sort of limits on it. But I think one of the potential solutions up there was to see whether 3 of those tiny homes could be moved to 3 other properties and thereby, have a reasonable outcome. So I guess the question now is, will other councils, particularly in Victoria, follow suit on this this step that Mount Alexander's taken?
Yeah, it's have to look a bit laterally, maybe look at are there some barriers? Is there some of that, red tape, if you like, that what might be well intended, but in the circumstances is really having an effect that is not desirable in a marketplace where we're really struggling to find accommodation opportunities.
Tony, my pick of the week before we wrap up, and I'm really keen to get your thoughts on this. I was just shaking my head for a couple of days about this one. This is out of Western Australia, where the town of Cambridge apparently made a decision a few months back. It was made by, I think, an acting CEO at the time after an issue was raised by the mayor there, that one of the local papers in particular, Perth Now, had been overly negative and critical of the council, and they made the decision based on the, let me see if I can recall this correctly, the psychological impact on staff of that negative coverage, of removing that particular newspaper from being accessible in its library and its administration building where generally the papers had been available. They got away with this for a few months until somebody caught wind of it and became a media story last week, and it's now been reversed, but pretty thin-skinned in my view.
Yeah. Look, I think pretty concerning in terms of, putting it, taking away, the availability of a newspaper from a library, because, somehow editorially the views might not reflect views of the council. This, this sort of question I have heard come up in Victorian Council. Sometimes it's about, should we advertise in that publication that, editorially often comes out and gives us a kick. We've seen councils criticised for, I can think of the Moira Commission of Inquiry, where there was some criticism of the council in relation to a decision at one point to withdraw advertising from the New Merca Leader, I think it was called. But, certainly keeping a strong, what do they call it? Is it the fourth estate? I've forgotten the French Revolution.
Yeah.
Is it the fourth? Yeah, the fourth estate. Yeah, a strong press, and is part of our democracy, and the notion of withdrawing publications from a library, any sort of publication from a library, to me, it's we're starting to go down that path of constraining free speech and access to free speech.
I think there's a few lessons in this, and I'm going to ask any CEO or senior director that's listening to us or watching this show, and I know we have a lot, to actually have a look at this story and share it with your communications teams as a bit of a case study on how things can go wrong. The last thing I want to say about this that I thought was also extraordinary was the official comment when announcing that the decision had been overturned after the media speculation last week. And it says, and I quote, that we've identified an administrative error resulting in a miscommunication over the distribution of these two newspapers in the town's library, and that's now been rectified. Now, come on. You made a mistake.
The administrative error was someone pushed send when they shouldn't have, Chris.
Yeah, you made a mistake. Own up to it. On reflection, we could have handled this better.
Yeah.
And, we've reversed what was a poor policy decision in the first. But don't call it an administrative error over a miscommunication. That's just weasel words. And it just makes you look even worse.
Couldn't agree more, Chris. Although, I got to say, I have been to WA and read Perth now, and it is full of articles about local councils and
well, it's a bit like the Herald Sun, isn't it?
Yes.
Of West Australia. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we don't have to like it, but it's there. Work with it. Do better is all I'm saying. I'd love to get Mr. Cooper's thoughts on that too. I reckon he'd be of similar mind. Thank you, Tony.
We should subscribe to Perth now, Chris.
Yes, you're right. It's a regular source of council. I don't want to say council bashing, but certainly some no holds barred coverage. Let's put it that way. All right, we might draw a line under it there. Thank you, Tony. There's been, we thought we didn't have much to talk about this week, but there's been quite a bit in that, and I suspect that'll be the same next week. I hope you have a great week. I want to thank you and your team at Hunt & Hunt Lawyers, as always, for being great supporters of TGU here on VLGA Connect, and I look forward to catching up with you next week.
Thanks so much, Chris. I look forward to it as well.
That's Tony Rownick. That's TGU for another week from VLGA Connect. Thanks so much for your company, for listening, and for watching. And we hope to see you again very soon. Bye for now.